In my history project, I have to talk with a person of a different generation about different topics. I chose to talk with Mr. Moss. He's a faculty member of the Darlington School. So I'm going to start off with the year 1970.
1970.
So that was the time when the Vietnam War happened. So can you tell me about it, like how it affected your life or the life, like people around you?
Yeah, I was at the time I graduated from college 3 years earlier. I was teaching at an independent school in Florida, and I had what was called a teaching deferment, meaning educators were not being drafted into the Army at the time. But I came very close to being drafted, and several of my friends went to Vietnam. One of them was actually killed in Vietnam. So yes, Vietnam affected me greatly because, one, all of my generation were worried about being drafted and sent to Vietnam, and those of us who weren't, who were lucky enough not to go, had friends who had to go. It was a very traumatic time, and I think most Americans today would agree it was a mistake. It was a war we should not have fought.
Then to another topic, was it weird to be able to bring a mobile phone with you instead of only having a home phone? Like, when was the first time you had your first mobile phone?
My first mobile phone was in 1992. It didn't fit in your pocket. And it's, I don't know how we ever got along without them.
That's true. And like, how was it in your environment? Was it only like the richer, wealthier people who got like mobile phones first, and then it came to like
Initially, yes. They were very expensive. Of course, they still are. But most people didn't really think they needed them for the first few years, but they very quickly caught on.
Then we're gonna move on to 1980. So, did the stock market crash of 87 affect your life?
Yes, I came to Darlington in 1982, and when the crash came, it made things difficult because we had to, in this country the expression is tighten our belts. We had to be careful about spending. School kept operating. We were full with students, but we couldn't give faculty raises, for example.
Okay.
So
it like affected you in the job?
In the job, yeah.
One of the growing environmental concerns during the 1980s was the development of acid rain. Was it a big of a deal as it actually was? Like, have you ever experienced that, or was it?
It was a big deal in terms of the whole environmental issue. I think people became very conscious of the danger and damage to the environment in the 80s through acid rain, pollution, air pollution, exhaust fumes from cars, coal burning furnaces, and so I became very aware of environmental issues. I think we're doing some serious damage to the climate of the country and the world, and I'm excited to see the development of things.
So you mentioned that you're worried about the environment. Do you think like everyone at that time was worried? Because nowadays, like especially we teenagers are like really passionate about it, because like
I think my generation weren't passionate. There were a few people who worried about it, but it was a new thing.
And we're gonna move on to 1990. About migration and settlement, like with the Immigrants Act of 1990 bringing in the largest numbers of immigrants so far, how did it affect the economy and job ability?
I think America needs a more open immigration policy. America was founded by immigrants. Everyone who came here came from Europe, essentially, and I think America's diversity has always been a reflection of the immigration policies. I think immigrants help the economy. For example, there are a lot of jobs in this country that particularly immigrants from Mexico and Guatemala, are willing to do that Americans don't want to do.
Yeah.
So I think we needed policy by which immigrants can gain citizenship.
So you think it was like a positive thing?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people thought it was really negative.
And I believe it's positive.
2000. How did 9/11 impact your life of living and thoughts of traveling?
9/11 was a huge event. In fact, I remember when it happened, I was sitting in this office because so many people were afraid to travel. It totally changed the world of airline travel around the world.
Yeah. So you said like you were one of the only ones who took a flight. So probably it was like for the economics, like for
Yeah. For instance, in our
really
convention,
hard.
we normally had about 8,000 people.
Yeah.
I think that year maybe we had like 2,000, 3,000. So all of the money that those people would have spent in Texas for hotels and restaurants and taxis, you know, it really hurt people's income.
Yeah. How did the act of 9/11 worsen the tension between other foreign nations and Americans such as Iraq and Afghanistan?
I think it caused a huge fear in America of particularly Muslim countries, only because Muslims had flown the planes. I think it created a lot of prejudice in America against people who had done nothing wrong. Their leaders had. I've always said people are people. It's the governments that fight each other and cause wars. It's not the people.
So you think it's like not really fair to like judge all of the people from there only because of that?
Yeah.
We're gonna go to 2010. So when COVID-19 hit the world, how did it change the environment around you? Because I was really affected too of my like teenage years. How did you feel about it with your family?
Oh, I was very affected because, first of all, we closed the school. My family and I, you know, wore masks everywhere we went except when we were with each other. I was one of the first people I knew to get the shot as quickly as I could, the vaccine.
Were you ever worried about your own health?
Oh, terrified.
Okay.
Terrified because I'm diabetic, I'm older, and so that put me at high risk. So yeah, I've been very concerned about my own health.
So you were very like isolated, because I remember like I was not able to see my grandparents for like months. Like I could talk with them through a window.
Oh
so
yeah.
It was really hard for them to be that isolated.
I still think there are a lot of Americans who didn't take it as seriously as they should, and who still don't.
Then we're gonna move on to 2020. So how do you feel about the war in Ukraine? Like my family, obviously we talk a lot about it. Even if I live in Switzerland, we're still really close to Ukraine because everything in Europe is so near. How do you feel about it when you still have a huge distance to it, but are you still scared?
I think Americans are very concerned about Ukraine.
Yeah.
That's our big fear in this country, that if the United States tried to help Ukraine militarily, which we could easily do, Putin might retaliate with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And then we would retaliate with nuclear weapons. That's the big fear.
So do you think there could be a possibility that other nations going to be involved
Yes.
in it? Yeah.
Very much so.
And do you think it's going to be like a long-term thing? Like it's going to go over years?
I think it could. And I wouldn't be surprised if Putin didn't decide to invade Latvia or Finland.
Then about politics, do you feel comfortable to talk about the election from Donald Trump?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Oh yeah.
So how do you feel about it? Do you think the election was like stolen, or there was like no?
I think that's just pure nonsense.
Okay.
Those are lies being spread by people who lost. So,
Okay. Yeah, I can only talk from my experience. Like even we are in Europe, like when the election is going on, that's a huge thing in Switzerland, like in whole Europe.
it has divided. He has divided this nation. It's the most divided I've ever
Mhm.
seen my country, and I'm 76 years old.
And like in Switzerland, we're really open about politics. Like everyone has their own, obviously, opinion.
Yeah.
But here, like that's why I asked you if you're comfortable to
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about it, because I came here and I felt like it's almost like you should not talk about politics here.
Yeah.
And I think that's really like I never experienced that it's like a no-go to
Yeah.
talk about politics.
And
But
I'd
here-
never experienced it before
Yeah.
either until the past 5 or
Mhm.
6 years. And now the country is just very divided and filled with hate.
Then that's my last question. What can you say about like the medical care, how it developed over time? So-
America has the potential to give the best medical care in the world.
Mhm.
It doesn't. It falls behind most European countries. It's controlled by the insurance company
Mhm.
and by the large medical corporations who own hospitals all over the country.
Mhm.
And it's all about profit.
Yeah.
Whereas in most European countries, healthcare is a right. It's
Yeah.
guaranteed.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wanted to ask. I'm not sure.
And it
You have
should
to
be.
correct
And
me
it
if
should
I'm
be in
wrong.
this country.
But I've heard, like, for example, when you broke your leg and the ambulance has to come, that families are really worried about that because you have to pay like thousands for
yeah.
the ambulance. And in Switzerland, I can never think about that.
Yeah.
Everything is free. Like, I'm safe.
Yeah.
And here, I heard a lot of like families talking about it that are like worried to go to a hospital because it costs so much.
Yeah. And to me, that is just an example of where the United States
Mhm.
is so far behind Europe. But yeah, I think America's really losing.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed.
Mm.
But again, the medical care we receive is superb. It's maybe the best in the world,
Mhm.
but people can't afford it.
Exactly. That was really like sad for me to see how people talk about medical care. Like they have to be worried about going to the hospital. Like it shouldn't be like that. That's it.
That's
Thank
it.
you so much. I enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, I enjoyed
about it.
talking to you, and